The broadcast of the Minneapolis Heritage Preservation Commission for January 18, 2022 will now begin.
Good afternoon and welcome to this live broadcast of our virtual meeting of the January 18th, 2022 regular meeting of the Minneapolis Heritage Preservation Commission. This meeting includes the remote participation of members as authorized under Minnesota Statute Section 13D.021 due to the declared local health pandemic. For the record, my name is Madeline Sundberg and I serve as chair of the Minneapolis Heritage Preservation Commission. I will now call this meeting to order and ask the clerk to call the roll so we may verify the presence of a quorum.
Commissioner Sandbolt will not be with us this evening. Commissioner Bjornberg.
Present.
Commissioner Booty.
Present.
Commissioner Howard.
Present.
Commissioner Johnson.
Present.
Commissioner Nystrom.
Present.
Commissioner Stady.
Here.
Commissioner Struthers.
Present.
Commissioner Sundberg.
Present.
Commissioner Van Der Eyck.
Here.
That's 9 members present.
Thank you. Let the record reflect we do have quorum. With that, we will proceed to our agenda, a copy of which was posted for public access to the city's Legislative Information Management System, which is available at lims.minneapolismn.gov. Our first order of business is to adopt the agenda for this meeting. We will work from the agendas that are available online. I will go through the agenda and sort out what items will be continued to a future meeting, what items will be discussed, and what items will be put on the consent agenda to be approved as recommended by staff and without further discussion. Item number 4 is the Upper Harbor Terminal demolitions. This is 3800 and 3360 First Street North, 2 and 5136th Avenue North, 5134th Avenue North, 3639, 3648, 3700, and 3701 Washington Avenue North, Ward 4, adjacent to Ward 1, demolition of historic resource, will be discussed. Item number 5, the Coliseum Building and Hall, 2708 East Lake Street, Ward 2, National Register of Historic Places nomination will be on consent unless someone wants to speak in opposition to or modify the staff recommendations. I'd like to check to see if anyone has called in or if any commissioners would like to discuss item number 5, the Coliseum Building, if you want to have it removed from consent agenda. If you've called in, press *6 to let me know you are there. Don't see any at the time. Item number 6, the Cavalry Lutheran Church, 3901 Chicago Avenue, Ward 8, National Register of Historic Places nomination. This will be on consent unless someone wishes to speak in opposition to or modify the staff recommendations. Again, if there are any members of the public, if you could press *6 and let me know you're here to talk about item number 6, the Cavalry Lutheran Church, or if there are any commissioners, you could let me know if you wish to pull this from the consent agenda. Don't see any at this time. So the proposed agenda is that the consent agenda will include the following items. Item 5, the Coliseum Building and Hall, and item 6, the Cavalry Lutheran Church, the National Register nominations for both properties. Again, commissioners, is there any opposition to staff recommendations for these items? Is there anyone from the public that wishes to speak in opposition to these items, such as item 5 and 6? We will approve these consent items in one motion at the start of the meeting. And then item 4, the Upper Harbor Terminal demolitions, will have staff presentation, public comment, commission discussion, and action. Commissioners, may I have a motion to approve the proposed agenda?
Bjornberg so moves.
Thank you, Commissioner Bjornberg. Is there a second?
Johnson seconds.
Aye.
Thank you, Commissioner Johnson. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll ask the clerk to call a roll on the motion.
Commissioner Bjornberg.
Aye.
Commissioner Booty.
Aye.
Commissioner Howard,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Commissioner Nystrom,
Aye.
Commissioner Stady,
Aye.
Commissioner Struthers,
Aye.
Commissioner Vander Eyck,
Aye.
Chair Sundberg.
Aye. The agenda is approved. Our next order of business will be to approve the minutes from our January 4th, 2022 meeting. May I have a motion to approve those minutes?
Johnson so moves.
Thank you, Commissioner Johnson. Is there a second?
Nystrom second.
Thank you, Commissioner Nystrom. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll ask the clerk to call a roll on the motion.
Commissioner Bjornberg,
Aye.
Commissioner Booty,
Aye.
Howard,
Aye.
Commissioner Johnson,
Aye.
Commissioner Nystrom,
Aye.
Stady,
Aye.
Commissioner Struthers,
Aye.
Commissioner Vander Eyck,
Aye.
Chair Sundberg.
Aye.
9 yeas and 0 nays.
Thank you. The minutes are approved. Before I open the hearing to public comments, let me summarize the process for conducting this public hearing in this virtual format. First, we'll act on the consent agenda that we just set. Once items on the consent agenda are approved, the commission is done with those items and applicants may contact planning staff tomorrow about next steps. After the consent agenda items are approved, we'll take each remaining agenda item in order. First, the planning staff will present its report and commissioners may ask questions of staff. Then we will hear from the applicant and commissioners may ask questions of the applicant. After that, I will open the public comments. We will take speakers in the order they are pre-registered, if there are any. Speakers will be limited to 2 minutes. After your name is called, if you could please state your name and address for the record and then proceed to your comments. After I've gone through the list of pre-registered speakers, I'll check to see if there are any other speakers who may have called in the queue. In order to activate your microphone, you'll need to press *6 on your phone and then wait to hear the pre-recorded message before we can hear you. So again, I'll take the pre-registered speakers and then open it to anyone else who may be in the queue. Please keep your comments to the specific application that is before us today. After the public comments are complete, I will close the hearing. Commissioners will deliberate and act on the application before us. So I will now open the public hearing on the consent agenda items. So again, this is item 5, the Coliseum Building and Hall, and item 6, Cavalry Lutheran Church. Again, is there any opposition to staff recommendations for these items? If you could press *6 if you called in about one of these items. Seeing none, I will now close the public hearing on the consent agenda items. May I have a motion to approve staff findings and recommendations for these items?
Johnson so moves.
Thank you, Commissioner Johnson. Is there a second?
Howard seconds.
Thank you, Commissioner Howard. Any discussion? I guess I'd just like to say that I'm really excited to see 2 more properties in Minneapolis make it into this process for the National Register. I think they're exciting ones to have move forward. Seeing no additional discussion, I'd like to ask the clerk to call a roll on the motion.
Commissioner Bjornberg,
Aye.
Commissioner Booty,
Aye.
Commissioner Howard,
Aye.
Commissioner Johnson,
Aye.
Commissioner Nystrom,
Aye.
Commissioner Stady,
Aye.
Commissioner Struthers,
Aye.
Commissioner Vander Eyck,
Aye.
Chair Sundberg.
Aye.
That's 9 yeas and 0 nays.
Thank you. Item 5, the Coliseum Building and Hall, and item 6, Cavalry Lutheran Church, are approved as recommended by staff on the agenda. Applicants for those items may contact planning staff tomorrow about next steps. Our next item is number 4, the Upper Harbor Terminal demolitions. The demolition of historic resources. The staff report will be presented by Andrea Burke.
Good evening, Madam Chair and Commissioners. My name is Andrea Burke, and I am the supervisor for the Historic Preservation Team in CPED. I am presenting tonight a modification to the demolition of historic resource application for the potential Upper Harbor Terminal Historic District and 3 monolithic concrete domes. This item was continued by the HPC at the December 14th, 2021 meeting and requested that the applicant modify the request to account for specific details relative to the buildings and structures proposed for demolition and to provide additional information about the mitigation plan. Next slide, please. To recap, CPED owns the Upper Harbor Terminal property located on 9 parcels along the Mississippi River in North Minneapolis. Comprising 53 acres and 37 buildings and structures, the Upper Harbor Terminal was developed as an intermodal barge shipping terminal in 1968 near the head of commercial navigation on the river and remained in operation until late 2014 due to the planned closure of the Upper St. Anthony Falls Lock. The city, in conjunction with the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board, are planning to redevelop the land into a mixed-use development with residential, retail, service, hospitality, office, light industrial, and outdoor performing arts center, and parkland. The applicant has modified the request to reduce the number of buildings and structures proposed for demolition. Next slide, please. Instead of asking for demolition of all resources, the applicant is proposing demolition of 19 buildings and structures out of 37 total resources within the district, inclusive of the 3 domes that are recommended eligible as individual landmarks. The applicant has also provided additional information on the details of the mitigation plan proposed as part of the AUAR and the scope of work included in the phase 1 of the larger redevelopment proposal. The bulk of my presentation will be focused on the 19 resources proposed for demolition and the staff's analysis, while the applicant will focus on the phase 1 description and mitigation details. Next slide, please. Phase 1 of the larger redevelopment plan proposed for the 53-acre site impacts 19 resources. Phase 1 includes the public infrastructure, utility service extensions, transmission lines to construction of a new parkway, and reconstructions of Dowling and 33rd Avenue North, riverfront trails, public parkland, and restored shoreline, as well as development into mixed-use affordable housing, performing arts center, and jobs-focused development. With the work proposed for the shoreline, this project will trigger Section 106 of the Army Corps of Engineers permit, and the applicant will comply with the regulations. This is different than the last meeting and my last staff report, so I wanted to call that out. Out of the 19 resources proposed for demolition, 7 are contributing and 12 are non-contributing within the potential district. The 3 domes are non-contributing to the district, but eligible individually. I will give a brief description of each resource next. Next slide, please. I've combined the slides according to each of the properties that are being proposed for demolition. I'll kind of go through each one briefly so you get a good visual and kind of get an idea as to what the condition is, as well as some potential alternatives for reuse, cost of renovations, reasons for demolition as I go through. So bear with me. So number 1, which is ID 44, as you'll see in the upper left-hand corner, is the office building. This is a contributing. It was built in 1968. It's in structurally fair to poor condition. This was based on the 2015 report by SEH. Potential alternative reuses that were looked into this was another small office or retail commercial building. Cost for renovations for this to mothball the building were $45,000, and to upgrade it would be an additional $40,000. Rezones for demolition for this building, it's functionally too small to support a traditional retail or office use, and it's located on a proposed redevelopment site that's planned to include affordable housing and community-oriented commercial uses. The scale house, which is ID 45 in the lower left-hand corner, was built in 1970, and it is also a contributing resource. This is in good condition structurally. The building, though, was not designed or built for continuous human occupation. To mothball the scale house, it would be approximately $20,000, and to upgrade it would be an additional $15,000. And though these costs seem relatively small compared to an overall city budget, spending this amount of money on a 200 to 300 square foot building is not reasonable in the eyes of the applicant. The reason for the demolition is located in the path of the proposed Dowling Avenue North reconstruction project and has no reuse value. The truck scale, which is also in this photo, which is ID number 46, it's in good condition. It's a truck scale. It's not necessarily designed for human occupation. To mothball it, kind of preserve it, would be around $15,000. But this is also on the site for the redevelopment that's planned to include affordable housing. The scale house, which is on the other side of the number 45 scale house, was built in 1983. This is a non-contributing resource according to the period of significance. It's in structurally good condition, though same thing, because it's very small. It was not designed for continuous human occupation. To mothball the building would be $15,000, to upgrade it another $15,000. And this is also on the same parcel to include affordable housing. On the upper right, this is the truck scale. This was also built in 1983. You can kind of see it shortly above where the words truck scale are. This has numerous spalls and potholes. This is non-contributing in this driving surface slab. This was not, it's a truck scale. It was not built for human occupation. It would be about $10,000 to upgrade it by infilling the pit and removing the scale works. But it's located also on the same site that's planned to include affordable housing. In the lower right-hand corner is the warehouse, ID 54. This is built in 1971, and it is contributing. This is probably the largest building on the Upper Harbor Terminal site. It's in good condition. The roof is in fair condition, and the building doesn't meet building code for sprinkler and fire suppression. Reuse alternatives that were looked into for this building. It could be another conditioned office building, conditioned storage building, indoor sports or recreation use, indoor farming or gardening, training center, community resource hub. This building is one of the more expensive properties to renovate. To mothball it would be about $1.5 million, and to upgrade it for any of these uses described would be well over $5 million. And these costs are cost prohibitive to the city and the Park and Recreation Board. This warehouse, being one of the largest buildings on the site, is located directly in the path of the proposed parkway, which will provide access through the entire Upper Harbor Terminal site and will require the warehouse building to be removed. Next slide, please. On this slide, in the upper right hand or left hand corner, excuse me, is the shipping and receiving building. This is ID 55. This was built in 1985 and is also non-contributing to the district. This building is in good condition. It's a very small size building, and it's connected to the warehouse. There were no estimates to mothball or improve this building separate of the warehouse because it's connected to the warehouse. And there were no viable reuse means, as this structure would need to be removed when the warehouse, if the warehouse is removed. ID 57 are the conveyors right below there. These were built between 1973 and 1988, but these are identified as contributing by the designation study that the consultant put together. These are in good structural condition. There's other alternative uses include an aerial walkway, an overhead structure to suspend recreation amenities such as a swing or a climbing apparatus. To renovate this structure would be between $50,000 and $100. and the potential safety hazards of these overhead structures to present to future users of the site, and as well as the cost to secure these structures from potential access is the reason the applicants are asking that they be removed. The rail dump, which is ID 58, was built in 1973. It is also a contributing resource. This is in structurally poor condition. The size of the structure really only lends itself to be utilized as a small storage facility since it's open. To mothball, it would be $15,000. To upgrade it and secure it would be another $15,000 on top of that. The reasons for demolition is that there really is no viable reuse of the structure, and the direction or the location is directly in the path of the proposed parkway, which also would provide access to the entire site and park space. And that's the reason demolition is being sought. The trunk dump and hoist is ID 60 below. This was built in 1978. It is non-contributing. It is in fair condition structurally. And potential alternative reuses, there weren't any really identified. It wasn't intended for human occupation, and there's no viable reuse identified. Cost of renovation are also similar, around $15,000 to mothball it and then upgrade it for another $15,000. This location of this structure doesn't allow for the proposed park access and programming to occur based on community input and desires, and therefore has no reuse value. Next slide, please. Up in the upper left corner, ID 61 is the control building. This was built in 1978. It is non-contributing. This is in poor condition structurally. There were not any viable reuses identified for this structure. The cost of renovation would be to mothball it would be about $20,000, and then an additional $20,000 above that to upgrade it. Reasons for demolition: if it was to remain, it would have to be secured so it doesn't become a public safety hazard. And according to the applicant, that would not be a reasonable use of those funds or city funds. Let's see, the 4 dust tanks, which is ID 62. These were also built in 1978. They are non-contributing. These are in good condition. But because these structures were not designed for human occupation, they were really only intended to perform their original use. There was no realistic reuse identified that would align with the planned programming for the proposed park. There were no costs for renovations that were explored for the dust tanks. They don't have a potential reuse other than what they were initially designed for. And since the site is no longer operating as a shipping terminal, there were not further costs looked into these. The applicant did not find that securing the structures would be a reasonable use of funds. So now we will get into the domes. Dome 64, which is at the upper right corner. This dome is in structurally fair condition, but the canvas roof membrane is in poor condition, if you can see in this photo, with many parts of the roof membrane missing. Alternative uses explored were conditioned storage space, conditioned indoor sports or recreation use, indoor farming or gardening, such maybe an indoor conditioned training center. Costs to renovate, or actually costs to mothball the structure, would be around $450,000, and to upgrade it, such as new utilities, maybe a new concrete floor, heating and ventilation, is estimated at about $1.5 million. Both of these costs are cost prohibitive to the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board and would account for approximately 18% of the total park construction budget. Reasons for demolition: the location and the size of this dome doesn't allow for the proposed park access and programming to occur based on the community input. The structure is also a safety hazard, and it's cost prohibitive to upgrade the domes for potential reuse. Dome 65 in the lower right corner, very similar. This is non-contributing to the district, but individually eligible, built in 1984. This is also in structurally fair condition, but the roof membrane is in poor condition, with many parts of the roof membrane missing, as you can see in the comparison between the two photos. Same potential alternative reuses were explored, such as storage space, recreation use, sports use, farming. Costs to mothball this particular dome were estimated at about $320,000, and to upgrade were estimated at $1.1 million. With these costs, it would account for approximately 15% of the total park construction budget. And same reason for the other dome, it doesn't allow for the proposed park access and programming. Next slide, please. This is the third and last dome that still remains. This was built in 1984. It was it is non-contributing, but eligible individually. Same condition structurally, fair condition, but the roof is in poor condition. Same alternative uses were explored. To mothball this particular dome, it would be $470,000 estimated, and to upgrade it would be around $1.5 million. And same thing, this would account for approximately 20% of the total park construction budget. And same thing, it doesn't allow for the proposed park programming to occur based on the community input, which is why recent demolition is being sought. The Loadout Shelter Id 67, which is right below the dome, this was built in 1988. It is non-contributing to the potential district. It is structurally in good condition. The size itself, though, only really lends the building to be used as a small storage facility. To mothball this building would be $40,000, and to upgrade it would be an estimated $75,000 on top of that. The location of this loadout shelter is in conflict with the community programming areas for the site, and securing the structure would not be a reasonable means of funds, according to the applicant. The loadout shelter in the upper right corner is ID 68. This was built in 84. This is also non-contributing, structurally good condition. Same thing, it really only can be utilized as a small storage facility. To renovate this particular structure would be $50,000, excuse me, to mothball this particular structure would be $50,000, and to upgrade it on top of that would be another $95,000. Reasons for demolition follow the same as the other loadout shelter. It's in conflict with the community park programming. One of the last two, this is the truck and rail dump ID 69. This was built in 1988, and it is non-contributing. It is in structurally poor condition, and the size of its the structure only really lends itself to be utilized as a small storage facility. To mothball this would be approximately $15,000, and then to upgrade it would be an additional $15,000 on top of that. The applicant would need to remove the conveyor and secure it from public access for safety purposes. And this particular dump is in the direct path of the proposed parkway, which would provide access to the site, and therefore that's why the applicant is requesting demolition. Next slide, please. In the upper left corner is the boiler shed. This is the last building being proposed for demolition. It was built in 1975. It is contributing to the remainder of the site, the potential district. This is in structurally poor condition. There was no economic viable use or reuse for this burial shed identified by the applicant. The cost, there was no mothball option identified and looked into for this because of the condition of the structure was not salvageable. The location of this boiler shed is located on a proposed redevelopment site that's planned to include affordable housing and community-oriented commercial uses. And the rest of the slides shows the placement of the different structures according to the ID numbers that I just went through. In staff's opinion, the potential Upper Harbor Terminal Historic District is eligible for local designation under criteria 1, 3, 4, and potentially 7. And the 3 monolithic concrete domes are eligible under criteria 3 and 4. Both the district and the domes retain their integrity to convey their significance. Next slide, please. According to Chapter 599, if the Commission determines that a property is a historic resource, they shall deny the demolition permit unless the applicant meets their burden of proof with respect to an unsafe or dangerous condition, or whether there are no reasonable alternatives to demolition, considering the significance, the integrity, or the economic value or usefulness of the existing structure, including its current use, cost of renovation, and feasible alternative uses. Now, under this several prong finding criteria laid out by the ordinance, under an unsafe or dangerous condition, I want to mention that, we've, at least in staff's opinion, we've determined that the property is a historic resource. It has significance, it has integrity to convey that significance. So next we go into the pronged, excuse me, one moment. Analysis for demolition. So 5 out of the 19 resources proposed for demolition are listed in structurally poor condition. Staff acknowledges that there may be inherent dangerous conditions on the property from it being a vacant industrial site, but the evidence provided in the application does not satisfy this finding under the ordinance. Now, under reasonable alternatives to demolition, the resources have significance and integrity, but it is staff's opinion that the applicant has met their burden of proof and confirms there is no economic value or usefulness of the existing structures, and renovation and/or reuse is cost prohibitive. Under the consideration for current use, the site is currently vacant and it was not built for human occupation. The resources include truck scales, boiler sheds, conveyors, and dust tanks, in addition to the concrete domes, which were designed to hold commodities such as fertilizer. The district's use as a barge shipping terminal is no longer viable since the federal government closed the Upper St. Anthony Falls Lock in 2015. Under cost of renovation, excluding the concrete domes, the cost to mothball the resources range from $15,000 for the rail dump to approximately $1.5 million for the warehouse. Upgrades to renovate the resources would range from another $15,000 for the rail dump to $5 million for the warehouse, to give an idea of the range. The monolithic concrete domes are much more costly to mothball and renovate, ranging from around $320,000 to mothball the domes to $1.5 million for the upgrades. The costs to renovate the existing buildings and structures are unreasonable for a municipal public agency, given the lack of feasible alternative uses as described in a moment. Under feasible alternative uses, the 2015 report and the community engagement looked into alternative uses for the site. Its use as a barge shipping terminal is obsolete since the St. Anthony Falls Lock was closed. Other uses explored for the domes included an indoor sports or recreation use, farming, or a training center. Other uses explored for the truck scales and dust tanks, truck dumps, shipping, receiving buildings, scale house, and control building had no alternative uses identified, as they could only perform their original intended use for the barge shipping terminal. The office building and warehouse could be modified into another office space, perhaps a commercial or retail establishment, training center, or community resource hub. But the cost to renovate these industrial resources into another use other than the industrial use it was intended for are prohibited to the applicants who are municipal public agencies. Whether it is $15,000 for a scale house or $5 million for the warehouse, it is staff's opinion that the costs are not justified, given the limited options of reasonable alternative uses. Thus, with these revisions to the scope, the Department of Community Planning and Economic Development recommends that the Heritage Preservation Commission adopt staff findings for the application by CPED and the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board, and approve the demolition of historic resource application for the 19 resources within the potential Upper Harbor Historic District, including the 3 monolithic concrete dorms, subject to the following conditions. The mitigation plan, as developed as part of the AUAR for historic properties, shall be carried out to offset the adverse impacts resulting from the demolition of historic resources. This concludes my presentation. I'm available for any questions. The applicant has also prepared another presentation to clarify their request. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrea. Commissioners, are there any questions for staff? Commissioner Howard.
Thank you, Andrea. That was really, really helpful in the information we got in our packet last week was also very, very helpful. So I really appreciate the time that you took to update that information and put it in a format that made a little more sense to us. 2 questions. One is, typically when we approve demolitions, don't we typically have a couple standing conditions that get attached to those, or are those only attached to C of A's? You're on mute.
Thank you. Getting back into technology. That was a good question. As I was just saying a moment on mute. I think we typically put them on most of them, but when we approve a demolition, generally we just approve the demolition. But as we can go with the further more questions, I'm going to look back at a few more and just get a firm answer on that.
Yeah, double check just in case. I just noticed that as I was looking again at our agenda. And then the other question I have for you is, in your findings on page 11, you have the potential Upper Harbor Terminal Historic District is not eligible for listing in the National Register of Historic Places. And I just want to make sure that I understand that although it is not eligible as a historic district of its own, it is believed to be a contributing element to a larger historic district that is National Register eligible. Is that understanding correct?
Your understanding is correct, Commissioner Howard. In the previous evaluations that the consultants have done as part of the AUAR, and as well as the local designation study, as well as the other evaluations, the recommendation was that the Upper Harbor Terminal Historic District was not eligible for the National Register on its own. However, it was considered a contributing resource to the larger Upper Harbor Historic District, which is a much larger, potentially eligible historic district for the National Register, and that was concurred by the State Historic Preservation Office. So yes, you are correct.
Okay, and similarly, the domes, if I'm reading the AUAR correctly, the domes, the Park Service, the State Historic Preservation Office considers them significant under criterion C, but that they are not likely to meet the standards of criteria consideration G, which is at extraordinary significance. And make sure that we understand the full significance of the property and what these demolitions mean, because the beginning of demolition of this district affects not just this district, it affects that larger historic district and its potential National Register listing going forward, because it will be losing a contributing resource, if I'm understanding correctly.
You are also correct on that statement. Yes, they did state that just as you stated it.
Okay, thank you for confirming that.
Thank you, Commissioner Howard. Are there any other questions for staff? I'd also like to thank staff for the memo that we received. It definitely laid out things, I thought, in a way that made more sense to me. Doesn't look like we have any questions, so I will now open the public comment for this item. I believe the applicant is here to speak. Hillary, I think you're listed as starting.
That's correct. Good evening, Chair Sundberg and commissioners. It's nice to see you again this evening. And I also want to wish you a happy new year, although we're getting to the end of January here. So realize our timing is not quite to the new year. As you know, I'm Hillary Holmes, and I'm a senior project coordinator for the city of Minneapolis and CPED. And I'm here once again just to speak to the application before you. The city is a co-applicant for the demolition of historic resource application for the Upper Harbor Terminal. And the other co-applicant is the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board. The city will be transferring the future parkland on the Upper Harbor Terminal site to the Park Board within the next 1 to 2 years. And the park parcel contains the majority of the structures we're discussing this evening. However, as Andrea had noted, not the extent of the structures. So some of the structures are within the city's public infrastructure project area, as well as the, excuse me, a development parcel slated for the mixed-use affordable housing development. I wanted to note again this evening that there are 2 representatives from the MPRB project team on the call this evening. Julie Aldrich, the MPRB project manager for the Upper Harbor Regional Park project, as well as John Slack, who is with Perkins & Will. He's a landscape architect and associate principal, and Perkins & Will is the lead consultant on the park design. I also wanted to note that Aaron Q with the 106 group is available on the call, though isn't planning on speaking unless able to respond to questions as they come up. The 106 group, as you may recall, helped prepare this application and is a consultant to the park board on this project. I'll give you a brief overview again of the project with a little more detail based on the questioning last time. You're familiar from the background materials as well as our presentation at the December 14th commission meeting. Julie and John will address in more detail the reasons for demolition of the structures included in the application, as well as the mitigation, of course. As noted in our application, phase 1 of the redevelopment identifies the 17 structures to be demolished or removed. And in response to the request from the commission at the December 14th meeting, we have identified 2 additional structures that may need to be demolished as the project progresses. And that would bring the total to 19 demolitions or removals out of the 37 existing structures on site. There is a presentation that was submitted. If we're able to run through that this evening, it provides a couple of more graphics in response to some of the questions around the development overview and phasing, and then some additional graphics provided by the park board team to address mitigation. I'll just note again that we're addressing the commission this evening to provide more detail on the due diligence that the redevelopment project has undertaken and the phasing. You're familiar with the site through our previous presentations. The Upper Harbor Terminal site is approximately 50 acres of property owned by the city of Minneapolis along 1 mile riverfront on the river in North Minneapolis. As Andrea has noted, and many of the materials have noted, the federal closure of the lock in 2015 required the city to cease operations of the barge shipping terminal. The structures on site were designed and constructed to function collectively as the terminal, and the site has operated not only recently, but for years at a deficit annually. And wanted to note that currently, and as some of the materials also noted, that deficit is approximately $2 million annually. The site, as long as it exists in its current state, will continue to incur the holding and maintenance costs that grossly outpace the minimal revenue from outdoor storage uses on site, which are also ceasing over the next few months. Any stabilization of the structures to prevent further deterioration also requires financial investment from the city, which is in addition to any cost to, rehab or reuse any of the structures, which would presume that there is an economically viable reuse for the structures, which we have determined that there is not. As previously stated, the redevelopment planning for the site began in 2015 when the closure of the lock was announced. The city and the park board have been working in partnership since that time, so since 2015, and then we're joined in the partnership in 2017 by a development team led by United Properties. The city of Minneapolis approved the Upper Harbor Terminal Coordinated Plan for redevelopment on October 14th, 2021, which is the result of this planning process. It also resulted in the Regional Park Concept Plan, which was approved by the MPRB on December 2nd, 2021. This redevelopment planning process has required the city and park board to complete our due diligence to assess the structural integrity and conditions of the existing structures, reasonable alternative uses, and economic feasibility of such uses. Where we are today is the culmination of years of analysis, planning, and engagement arrived at through an intensive community process and multiple iterations of the site plan and redevelopment plan. As you have seen, there are structures that the project team have found can balance the needs of reasonable alternative uses, condition, economic feasibility of reuse, as well as desired programming and design principles. And where there are structures that are not able to meet those criteria, that is where the demolition and removals are sought. and mitigation and interpretation are addressed. Julie and John, as mentioned, will address this in more detail soon. The development overview I showed you at the last meeting shows the site plan and land uses designed to support the reconnection of the north side to the river, as well as a development plan that will deliver on the following community benefits: environmental restoration and repairing environmental injustices through any environmental remediation on site, a district stormwater system and shoreline restoration, as well as creating approximately 20 acres of the new Northside Park space, along with new connections and access to the river. There are additional community benefits that were outlined in my presentation on the 14th. And a new slide that was in the presentation is to just note the development parcels by land use as well as parcel number. That can certainly be helpful as we're discussing. And the structures that are being focused on this evening are focused on development parcel 6A, parcel 2, which is the park parcel, and parcel 3. For note, the warehouse currently straddles the future park parcel 2 and parcel 3. In November of 2021, the City Council approved the development terms for the land conveyance to the Park Board for the park parcel and to United Properties or an affiliated entity for parcel 1B, as well as the terms for exclusive negotiating rights to First Avenue or affiliated entity for parcel 3 for the Community Performing Arts Center, and exclusive negotiating rights to United Properties or affiliated entity for the remaining development parcels. I know at the last meeting there was a question around the current progress around some of those agreements, and so wanted to note that, as that had occurred just at the end of last year. I also wanted to note that, as requested at the December 14th meeting, there was a slide included in materials tonight that show phase 1 of the development. The proposed removals and demolitions are focused on phase 1, not just of the private development, but of the park development and the public infrastructure project. So collectively referred to as phase 1 of the redevelopment. All of those will be occurring over the next few years. The new Riverfront Park and Public Infrastructure project I had noted are both part of phase 1. Oops, sorry, just seeing here the phase 1. And so that gives you, again, a kind of a timetable between 2022 and 2025. The majority of site work, or I should say the first site work to occur this year in 2022. That would involve demolition and removals, grading on the site, some of the shoreline work as well. And then to follow in 2023 and 2024, the park construction project, as well as the city's public infrastructure project, and then private development activities to begin occurring on site at the earliest in 2024. We could advance to the next slide, please. In order to support the transition of the Upper Harbor site from its original function into this mixed-use development that you see, the public realm and infrastructure improvements are needed to support access and connectivity to and within the site. I had detailed last time the system that entails, of course, ways to get around and utilities to be installed and constructed on site. The public infrastructure plans require the demolition and removal of the warehouse, associated shipping receiving building, truck and rail dump, office building, scale house and truck scales at Dowling, Washington. As noted, the boiler shed, other truck scale and scale house on parcel 6A at the corner of Dowling and Washington will need to be removed in order to advance the mixed use development on that site. The past 7 years of redevelopment planning certainly has not occurred in a vacuum. The redevelopment planning process has never been an all or nothing. Do we keep everything or not keep anything? There are certainly competing needs that we take very seriously and work every day to manage and try to balance. The city and the park board have considered and included the retention and reuse of some structures as a possibility throughout this process. Both the city and the park board have done our due diligence, and the result of that is the request in front of you. Next slide, please. I will now hand off the presentation to Julie Aldrich and John Slack from the MPRB project team to discuss in further detail the park plan design, the proposed removals, of course, and more detail on the mitigation. I want to thank you again for the opportunity to address the commission as part of the public comment and the continuance of this item, and will be available for questions following. Thank you.
Thank you, Hillary. Good evening, Chair Sundberg and Commissioners, and thank you for your time. My name is Julie Aldrich, and I'm a project manager with the MPRB and co-applicant to this request for approval. The Parkland portion of the Upper Harbor Terminal redevelopment project will preserve and interpret aspects of the industrial past, while the overall interpretive message will emphasize reclamation of this space by people and nature. The project will include art, language, stories, restoration, creative infrastructure, and a focus on green infrastructure, education, and jobs to begin this process of change. Next slide. Design principles for the park project were based on key outcomes resulting from extensive community engagement. During community engagement, it became clear that there are many ways to send messages about who a space is for and who is welcomed and celebrated. The project will balance industrial history and relevance with Indigenous and community culture and history. Community members have expressed a desire for an honest examination of what industry on the river has meant for this area and how the related development, infrastructure, trade, and pollution have impacted people and the land. There is no cultural and social connection between the residents of North Minneapolis and the existing structures on the site. In many cases, it was identified that there is a negative connotation between the use of the existing structures and the negative impact previous land use and heavy industrial activities of the site has had on residents in North Minneapolis. The project will provide places for language, history, culture, and environmental education and learning. Next slide. Community engagement assessed how key categories of park users, including children, teens, seniors, individual users, people in groups, and organizations might interact with the park. The resulting list of 10 key experiences includes information on how the physical park features can be tailored to support Northside community needs and desires. Desired activities and experiences for the park are organized into categories that inform the physical spaces. These activities range across wide spectrums and sometimes compete from individual to group activities to active and passive recreation. Next slide. The 19.5 acre park spans the entire length of the UHT property along the riverfront to the east and development parcels to the west. Much of the park is linear with a 5 acre central park space. Linear park areas feature the Parkway Road with parking, which will also serve as a city street, with separated bike and pedestrian trails, vegetative buffers, a gently sloped vegetated shoreline, and stormwater treatment areas. The main entrance to the parkway and park facilities will be via Dowling Avenue. Connections to the north and south beyond the park are planned to create continuous riverfront access and green space and can be completed with further land acquisition. Next slide. The 5 acre central park space is defined on the north, west, and south by Parkway Road and multi-use trails. The east edge is defined by the river and an existing structurally sound river wall to be retained. Some existing industrial infrastructure, such as the domes, will be removed. Red grain elevators, some overhead conveyors, and storage silos will be secured and repurposed. Public activity areas are focused in the northern portion of the park, while the southern area is devoted to gardens, green infrastructure, working and learning areas, and pathways to provide access to a more naturalized experience. Amenities are grouped to limit site footprint and enhance user convenience. Core park elements include circulation pathways, flexible plaza space, flexible lawn and picnic area, a play area, ADA water access, temporary mobile buildings with restrooms and shelter, a green infrastructure training center, and gardens and natural areas. Next slide. The existing structures on the UHT site were constructed for the operations of the site as a barge shipping terminal. These structures are no longer in use and are without current or viable use due to the cease in the operations of the UHT as a terminal. The site is currently being used for indoor and outdoor storage, and the property continues to operate in a deficit of approximately $2 million annually. Property management expenses exceed the revenues. In furtherance of the city-approved coordinated plan, the site will need to be redeveloped from its former and obsolete use to the proposed mix of uses in Riverfront Park. Removal of 19 structures is necessary in order to advance the City Council-approved coordinated plan for redevelopment and the MPRB-approved regional park concept plan, and to fully realize the community benefits delivered through the park public infrastructure, park and development projects. Next slide. The majority of existing structures are located on future public park and provide little to no economic value to enhance future redevelopment of the site, including new public infrastructure, private development, and park-related improvements. A small number of structures are located on a development parcel plan for mixed-use building with affordable housing and commercial space focused on the local north side community. Structures indicated in color green represent structures to be removed, and proposed parcel boundaries are shown in orange dashed line. Next slide. Reasons for the removal of existing structures include: the structures have no long-term economic value. It is cost prohibitive to implement safety and security strategies with existing structures that are proposed for demo and removal due to numerous public health, safety, and welfare concerns. It is cost prohibitive to restore, condition, and design these structures for another use. No desired or feasible park programming aligns with the preservation and restoration of these structures. And desired park programming cannot be implemented because of current space restrictions with the location and size of existing buildings. Next slide. Cost implications include: currently the terminal site operates at a $1.5 to $2 million deficit. Based on conditions assessments and potential reuse, estimated costs of $9,670,000 are needed to bring the site structures up to code. Estimated cost to mothball and secure structures is $3 million. Estimated cost to remove structures as estimated is $1,236,000. Next slide. The structures were extensively assessed for reuse options and cost implications for mothballing, securing, and upgrading structures to support human occupation. This chart indicates feasibility and potential for reuse and associated costs. Structures 44 to 62 are represented here. For example, item 6 indicates the large warehouse on site would require $1.5 million to mothball. An upgrade to accommodate reuse options listed is estimated to cost $5 million. Next slide, please. A continuation of this chart shows structures 64 to 72. In total, the cost implications for preservation of the 19 structures is over $3 million to mothball and over $9,670,000 to upgrade to be habitable for human occupation and use. Next slide, please. These key strategies were identified as part of the AUAR mitigation process. Evaluate options for adaptive reuse, preservation, removal, redevelopment, interim stabilization measures for existing buildings or structures. To explore interpretive planning that allows for phased implementation and balances the significance of the site through time and across cultures. A combination of soil cores, ground penetrating radar, and shovel testing is needed to identify whether historical structures remain beneath the surface. Consult with the State Historic Preservation Office under Section 106 of the Historic Preservation Act of 1966 when acquiring federal funds, permits, or authorizations in a federal undertaking. Portions of these strategies have been completed or are currently in process. Next slide. An archaeological treatment plan would include a brief project description, narrative of process and communications, a summary of known areas of potential and known archaeological resources, a compilation of previous studies, roles and responsibilities for plan implementation, general field and monitoring methodology, unanticipated discoveries plan, and specific treatment plan for known artifacts. Next slide, please. Additional documentation of existing structures would include an updated site survey, digital photography of structural remains, additional narrative written descriptions of structures, and information about construction methodology available from the dome manufacturer can inform relevant portions of the interpretive plan. The design team will be preparing construction drawings for adaptive reuse or stabilization of specific structures, and these drawings can be incorporated into the documentation. Next slide. An interpretive plan will be prepared and will serve the following outcomes. Convey the significance and story of this place. Facilitate an understanding of importance, relevance, and meaning. Develop long-range vision for interpretation and visitor experience. And define opportunities to interpret reused structures and structures no longer present on site. Such a plan would allow for phased implementation and include adaptive reuse of industrial elements while blending the history and culture associated with the site. Next slide. Interpretation will incorporate the 5 north side storylines defined by juxtaposition arts as appropriate to this place, which includes histories of ecological harm and disconnection, environmental justice work and vision, appropriation and reappropriation of this place, settlement history of the north side, food sovereignty and BIPOC communities. Next slide. Interpretation will incorporate Indigenous stories and connections to the site. The project will represent Indigenous language and culture through design, incorporate Indigenous art and language, provide educational opportunities of site remediation and interpretation of Indigenous relationships with native plants. Next slide. Interpretation will incorporate art, language, stories, restoration, and green industry, recognizing the past while reclaiming the space by and for people and nature. The project will identify Dome 66 outline, retain walls or interpret locations, reuse steel and concrete structural elements for site furnishings, reuse grain elevators for outdoor storage and a water reuse cistern, maintain the red grain elevator as a vertical presence on site, and utilize the river well and mooring cells for access to water. Next slide. The red grain elevator and tower may be reimagined and revitalized as a visually prominent and interactive feature. Ideas for interpretation and reuse could include an observation tower, a vertical plantscape, a climbing structure, zip line, and picnic structures. Next slide. In the short term, grain elevators will be reused for storage. In the long term, 1 to 2 grain elevators may be reused to house a water cistern, and others may be reimagined and revitalized as visually prominent and interactive features. Ideas for interpretation and reuse could include shelter, climbing, offices and storage, observation platform, art, play, vertical garden, and stormwater storage. Next slide. The conveyors may be reimagined and revitalized as both interactive and functional amenities. Ideas for interpretation and reuse could include reusing many of the smaller steel structural elements and concrete pieces on site for bollards, bike racks, public art, site furnishings, and lighting. Structural members repurposed for climbing, swinging, landscaping, or shade. Next slide. The domes may be reimagined as spatial features that recall their forms and footprints while in light gathering. Ideas for interpretation and reuse could include representation of the Dome 66 outline and possibly retain some lower portions of the walls or interpret the location of the walls. Interpretation of space and scale through the use of landforms and walls. Next slide. This concludes our presentation. Thank you for your time, and we'll gladly answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Hillary and Julie. Did John have any specific things he wanted to cover, or is he just available for questions?
John is available for questions.
Okay. Then I would like to check, commissioners, are there any questions for the applicant team? And thank you all for coming and presenting this revised presentation. Commissioner Howard.
You knew if I had questions for staff, I'd probably have questions for the applicant team. Thank you all for working with staff to put a more complete application in front of us, and for the presentation today that really kind of outlined all of the things that you've been thinking about. So I noticed that as part of your discussion of interpretation on the site, you talked about reusing conveyor belts and things like that, which we are currently looking at for demolition. So I'm wondering if we should be, is there a concerted plan to salvage as part of demolition so that can be done in the future? That's my first question. And then my second question has to do with the interpretive plan, and if you've developed a team yet to be doing the review and comment on that interpretive plan, and if not, would you be willing to have an HPC member on it?
Thank you for the questions. I'll start with an answer to the first question about conveyors. Yes, we are looking at opportunities to salvage components of those. And so as I mentioned as part of the presentation, that we would be looking at reusing potentially the vertical structural elements, such as some of the vertical components that are upright on the site, and then the slide that showed some of the mitigation strategies and had some sketches that identified those. You saw some sketches that showed some new stands that span those vertical elements that could include swings and climbing and shade structures and so forth. And so, yes, we are looking at being able to reuse portions of those structures. And then some of the structural members that are in place could be repurposed to support those amenities. There are also anticipated to be portions of those structural elements overall that can be salvaged and reused and repurposed for something new, such as site furnishings, lighting, bollards, bike racks, or public art. And so those types of components would be items that would be salvaged and reutilized or reimagined into something new and used in a potentially different location on the site, or potentially in the same location and are just kind of repurposed. So there's a few different things going on, but the ask certainly does include having the long horizontal spans coming out.
And is the plan for that salvage to be determined as part of the interpretive plan, or is deconstruction going to happen and things just be kind of set aside until it's decided how to go forward? I mean, how are you making that decision as to what's being salvaged?
I think it could certainly be included in the interpretive plan as we're speaking about that this evening. Certainly this information is being presented as being a subcomponent of the interpretive plan. And so I think that those components would be worked into the interpretive plan. But does that answer the question?
Yep, that makes sense. And then my first question was, would you be open to having an HPC member as part of review and comment on that interpretive plan?
Yes, so thank you for that question as well. I guess I feel as a co-applicant, I would also want to have Hillary and CPED weigh in on that particular question. But as far as the park board providing a stance on that, I would be open to that, certainly.
Great, thank you so much.
Thank you, Commissioner Howard. Commissioner Johnson, I believe, has a question as well.
I do. I do want to thank the applicant for coming back after a couple cycles and providing more information to us on this. It's been incredibly helpful. I guess my question is more just, you know, it's not really well, it is a question. So I know this upper terminal is going to comprise of multiple phases. I think I saw maybe 6 phases altogether. And what we're looking at right now is the demolition associated with phase maybe 1 and some of the other phases, some of the other elements. I guess my question is, if the HPC approves the demolition of these resources, kind of with the pseudo compromise being that, you know, we're keeping the 4 bins and elevator tower and some of the other elements, is it the applicant's intention to come back later for another phase and request the demolition of some of these further items, like the elevator tower and things like that?
Thank you for the question. We do not currently have plans to come back for an ask at this time.
Chair Sundberg, I could offer an answer to that as well. Thank you, Commissioner Johnson. as far as the public infrastructure project, on slide 7 of the most recent presentation, which was also noted in the December 14th presentation, it's the public infrastructure plan. It notes 2 phases for the public infrastructure project, and the second phase is really a portion, a segment of the parkway along the riverfront, which would not require any additional removals. So the extent of the removals included in this application are the extent for the public infrastructure project in total, both phase 1 and phase 2. And for the private development parcels, that is also the extent of the demolitions and removals, because parcel 6A includes a number of those parcels. Those are a number of those structures. Those are included in this application, this request as well. So that would be the extent for both the public infrastructure project as well as the redevelopment project, and that there are anticipated to be 2 phases of development for if you focus on the private development. And so the parcels noted in that phasing slide for the first phase, and then the balance of the parcels to follow in the next few years following. I can provide more information on that if that's helpful. Hopefully that answers your question.
It did. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. I think that addressed it. Following up on Commissioner Howard's question, Hillary, do you know if CPED would be open to having an HPC member sit on the interpretation plan review body, whatever it ends up being?
I will have to follow up on that. I'm not keyed into that planning process specifically, so that is definitely something I will respond back to following this meeting when I am able to get a little more information about that process. Thank you.
Thanks. Commissioner Struthers.
Thank you, Chair Sundberg. I have a question, and it's something that I was concerned about back in December, and I don't mean at all to suggest that there are any nefarious motives here, but I am still concerned about the fact that our staff that's making recommendations to us is employed by CPED, which is a landowner here, and I just wonder what procedures and policies might be in place to try to deal with potential conflicts of interest, because I could foresee a situation in which it would be very difficult for our staff to apply their own judgment to these questions when their employer essentially may have a different point of view. And again, I say this without impugning any motives or suggesting that anyone has any bad motives, but conflict of interest is a huge issue in general, and I just see it written all over here.
Thank you, Commissioner Struthers. I'm kind of wondering if, Andrea, that might be an appropriate question for you to answer.
Yeah, I can jump in. Thank you, Commissioner Struthers, and I don't take your comment in that way at all. I did look into this, and I did, that's why I included a section in the staff report that addressed your comments specifically, given your concern at the previous meeting in December. It's not, the city of Minneapolis, and especially CPED, we're a landowner within the city limits of Minneapolis. And it's not without precedent that CPED will bring a land use application before a citizen appointed body, such as the HPC of the Planning Commission. It happens much more regularly with the City Planning Commission. And, we have staff recommendation, and that's generally what it is. We have recommendations, and that's why we have findings that are they are laid out by the ordinance. And, it is our burden to make the case for the findings. On my team, we, as a matter of principle and integrity, we act, independently of the decisions that were brought before. We use our expertise, we use our background, our knowledge, our education and experience. In my experience, I have about 20 years of experience in this field, and I apply that to each and every one of the applications that come before. Everyone comes out differently, and I evaluate each differently. And this one, based on my analysis, my experience, my education, and the information that was put before me, it is my opinion that did not drive my analysis for this particular application in my conclusions. And then also keep in mind that that is my statement that I will give before the commission on record, but also, every one of you that are sitting here virtually are citizen appointed, and you ultimately make the decision on this, and it's not staff. And that sort of is as I call it, the beauty of the public process, in that it's sort of a commission of peers, of residents of the city who make decisions on these applications that are independent of staff's expertise. So that is what I can say. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. I would just also say, Commissioner Struthers, that I think that's why we're here, is so that it's not just staff at CPED agreeing with staff at CPED. That's why we're here to judge on what this is doing.
And could I make one more comment, which is just that I agree with that, and I think that's important, but I do wonder if there are any protections in place to protect staff and their independence. That's really my only question.
I can't answer that at this time, and largely only because none are coming to mind at this point. But when we have these applications that go through, even though staff makes a recommendation, the HPC acts as a quasi-judicial body in this respect. There is an appeals for this particular application, a demolition and appeals process that goes through, and any member of the public or the applicant can appeal it, not staff, of course. But then that sort of is part of the checks and balances. And should there be an appeal, should any member be dissatisfied with the outcome, it goes up to the city council. That wouldn't I necessarily say a protection of staff's opinion, but it sort of plays into the larger process.
Thank you, Andrea. I'm wondering if there are any other questions for the applicant team. Doesn't seem like it. Okay, and so I will now open this to anyone who is called in wishing to speak for or against the application. Again, I'll take the list of pre-registered speakers in order and then open the floor to any other speakers who may be in the queue. Please provide your name and address before making your comments, and press *6 on your phone and wait to hear the pre-recorded message to activate your microphone so that we can hear you. And so I think the only pre-registered speaker I have who's not on the applicant team is Roxanne O'Brien. If you are on the call, press *6.
Hi, can you hear me? Because I'm on speakerphone. Okay, good. Good evening, everyone. I don't feel comfortable telling my address, but I will say I'm a Ward 4 resident in North Minneapolis. And you can also contact me through probably asking the Sustainability Office, as I also sit on the Green Zones Committee for the city, as I have since 2014. I also just wanted to ask real quick, do I only have 2 minutes?
I'm not going to time you.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I appreciate that. So then I just wanted to real quick say that I looked up the mission statement of the Heritage Preservation Commission, and it said it helps to preserve the community's unique identity, culture, and character by protecting significant historic resources from the city's past. I'd also like to hope that we are looking at this also about how historical environmental resources of the past, pre-industrialization. So before I begin, I just wanted to again say I do live in Ward 4. I did serve also, like you all, as a volunteer on the Citizens Environmental Advisory Commission for 4 years in 2014 or 2013. And I am a community organizer, an environmental justice organizer as well. So today I come to you working with a coalition of people called CMEJ. It stands for Community Members for Environmental Justice. We are mostly working class, mothers and women, more specifically women of color, Black, Indigenous, Indian, Mexican, working class, and poor white. Most of us are Northsiders or Northeast Siders, but we have members across the Twin Cities and supporters within the state. I'm here to represent my community when I say there are concerns with the development plan and more specifically the AUAR and the mitigation strategies, and believe these also to be vague and incomplete, which is why Community Members for Environmental Justice did begin a litigation with the city to ask the court and all those with power to halt any further votes or decisions on this development plan before it moves any further during our litigation. As we work, we want to hold accountable our city and public officials to our laws and to the needs of the community. We do believe this is a historic area, site, rich with culture. People especially are a part of the resources, the environment as well, and the indigenous history that is often ignored, and the generational harm that has happened in an industrial area in an environmental justice community. And we believe mitigation strategies should be very clear, and the AUAR needs to be held to a higher standard, if not at least just to the law. And again, I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. I just thought somebody said something. So we believe it should be held to a higher standard, or just at minimum to the law that we have currently. And again, the ask is that you don't vote to approve any further development or demolition until litigation is complete surrounding the concerns of the AUAR environmental review and the mitigation. I appreciate your time tonight. Thank you for your work. And again, if you need to contact me, you can go through Kelly Molman maybe, or Kim Havey at the city and the sustainability office. They know how to reach me. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. I would like to check to see if there is anyone else who may have called in to speak for or against this application. If you could press *6 and let me know that you are there.
Hi, this is Erica.
Oh, I heard you for a second there.
Hello?
Yes.
This is Erica.
Hi.
Hi. I am not on the list. May I speak briefly?
Yes, if you could just give me your full name and address, please.
Sure. Erica Schläger de Santos. And again, I don't give my home address. I'm a Northsider, and my address is P.O. Box 27618, Minneapolis 55427.
Thank you.
I'm just calling in to mention something about the historical review, and it's a point of clarification. When we talk about historical resources on the river and in this area on all of the parcels, was there any consideration of the standing environmental condition of the river prior to industrialization? In keeping with the mission statement of the Historical Preservation Organization, is there any consideration of that going back to the 1855 time period?
I can try to address that question. The report that we receive from staff is based off of the potential historic district, which is based off the industrial era, although I would say like the archaeology, for example, that has been done, I believe does extend further back than that.
Awesome. So was
Yeah.
there an archaeological study done about sacred sites or spiritual sites on all 9 of the parcels, or just on a few of the parcels?
I'm going to ask staff member Andrea Burke to respond to that because she would have a better understanding to tell you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, hi, this is Andrea Burke. I can respond to that. So as part of this project, there has been several archaeological surveys that generally deal with that time period, which is prior to what is built there now. There was the archaeology kind of goes in a phased approach. Generally, you start with literature search where you identify based on literature what you may find there. Are there indigenous artifacts that could be there? What remnants of maybe any industrial buildings that were torn down before the Upper Harbor Terminal was constructed in the late 1960s? That happens first. From there, then an archaeologist would go out into the field and they conduct something which is called shovel test pits. It's another phased approach to identify what resources are out there. The entire 53 acres was considered for archaeology, and it got narrowed down to several parcels from there. In the staff report that's online, I note that in December of 2021, there was a geophysical investigation, which included a technique called ground penetrating radar, and it was conducted at 6 survey sites within the project area. And this investigation identified several, they're called anomalies, that were recommended for further archaeological testing on parcels 1A, 1B, and 7B. And then the archaeologist that was hired by the applicant went out and identified and uncovered a range of artifacts that were considered to be diagnostic and either related to the period of significance for the terminal itself or the underlying, there was a identified lumber mill beneath it. But some of these artifacts were included, such as a beverage can, wire and common nails, river clam shells. So there's a number of kind of phases that happen for the archaeology, and I think they're continuing with this, what's called a phase 2 archaeological survey. So to answer your question, yes, that period of history is considered in the archaeological survey for this site. And then generally anything that is identified or determined as part of that would go forward, either part of the mitigation plan or to be determined. I hope that answers.
May I ask a subsequent question? Thank you so much, Amy. Appreciate you. Was there any archaeological work done on parcel 6B, the one downstream from the warehouse on the river itself? As I believe 7 that you mentioned is not on the river, it's actually closer to the road.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that one more time?
Was there any archaeological work done on the site called, I believe it's 6B, it's downstream from the warehouse on the riverfront as opposed to on the street side where the 7 parcel is that you mentioned?
The whole site was considered. I can't give any specifics to that at this moment, but I think I will conclude that there and give this back to the chair. Thank you.
Chair, may I ask one other question about another period of time that has not been covered?
Yeah, if you want to just finish all of your comments and questions. Yeah.
Absolutely. The reason I'm asking that is there is a picture, if any of you are familiar, one of these pictures that the park board does install underneath the Hennepin Avenue Bridge of a village, a Dakota village at the time period that I mentioned. That would be in the 1800s, close to the 1855 treaty. That picture is upstream of the Hennepin Avenue Bridge, but it was a common landing space for Dakota people before there was a bridge. It also indicates a woman who, a Dakota woman who handled the ferry that crossed the river. The third thing I want to mention is that's why I'm asking about actual archaeological samples that have been taken of parcel 6B, I believe. It's not under the building, it's actually downstream of the building. The other thing I want to mention is anybody on the Historical Commission familiar with a village or a community in the 1940s called Mississippi Courts?
I know I'm not. So did you have
Okay.
comments you wanted to share about it?
What I understand about Mississippi Courts from the work that we've done is that that was a landing spot. There was also a workhouse nearby there where folks from many different reservations were brought to the cities, and they were housed in that area. And then in 1947, I believe the Mississippi Courts was torn down and they were dispersed into the city. So it functioned as part of the story of the decimation of culture in many different people on Dakota land. So I just want to bring that to your attention, especially when the park board was talking about land acquisition further downstream or upstream of the river to continue the plan that they have for that area. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments. I would like to check to see if there are any other speakers who may have called in. If you could press *6 and let me know that you are there. Okay, doesn't seem like there's anyone else. Thank you for everybody who did call in. We really appreciate having members of the public come virtually to talk to us about their concerns. It's an important part of the process. Seeing no other callers, I will close the public comment and start the commissioner discussion. I know that this application had a number of concerns the first time it came around, and I'm interested to hear what commissioners think seeing this revised application. I think, at least to me, it's a lot more clear. I appreciate that it's narrowed it down to the scope of the public works project and the sort of initial phase. And, you know, that instead of the whole just demolish everything. Commissioner Howard.
Thank you. Considering the comments that we just got, I'm just curious. I wanted to ask staff about the lawsuit and if there's any ramifications related to us making a decision on this demolition tonight. And then I do have some comments I'd like to talk about just briefly related to the application before us. But if we could get that clarification about the lawsuit first, I'd appreciate it.
Thank you, Commissioner Howard. I will confess I don't know much about the lawsuit. I know that there is one, but I can also tell you that in what's before you tonight does apply to State Statute 1599, and that this is a land use application before you, meaning there is 60 days to make a decision. 60 days have gone by and I have sent the applicant an extension letter to 120 days, and we do not go past 120 days without the applicant's permission, which is a very rare occurrence. So in terms of state law, we need to move forward with making a decision on this application.
Okay, thank you. That helps. I just wanted to say that I am really excited about the reimagination of this site and reclaiming a lot of that painful history that we've been hearing about that many Neapolitans associate with this industry and this location. It does have a remarkable history. We can see that in the buildings that were there. We can hear that in the things that we're hearing from the public tonight, that there's an even larger history that isn't really embodied within this idea of the local designated district. It's a rare intact industrial site in Minneapolis, but it's also a unique opportunity to reconnect to the river and to the environment that made Minneapolis what it became. I am concerned that allowing the demolition is going to erode the integrity of the district as an eligible local designation. It's also going to erode the integrity of that larger harbor district that goes well beyond this site, so I do have concerns about that. I'm especially concerned about the demolition of the domes because I do believe that they do have exceptional significance under architecture and engineering. Though I also appreciate the amount of work that would be needed to make that case currently. I do appreciate knowing there's a Section 106 hook on this, but I just want to let everyone know that when it comes to the Army Corps of Engineers, that hook can be pretty small, whatever the permit area is, and that may not pull in the entire district. So I'm not sure how much of a 106 hook for consultation that might be. It might actually pull in some of these concerns that the commenters, the public commenters today mentioned, though. So that's one thing to think about. So I've been thinking along these lines. I have some thoughts about some possible additional conditions that we could put on the demolition if we were to approve it tonight, but I'd love to hear what other commissioners have to say.
Thank you, Commissioner Howard. Commissioner Stady.
I just want to acknowledge the history of the Mississippi courts. Important. I was in special collections when the person that wrote a book about it researched it, but it is located, or where they were located, where the North Mississippi Regional Park are. So that's, I think, a bit north of the space we're talking about.
Thank you, Commissioner Stady. Commissioner Johnson.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo what Commissioner Howard said, that I really appreciate the applicant team coming back with a lot more information. I know I already said this earlier when I asked them a question, but it definitely paints a much easier picture for HPC to look at and understand kind of the plan going forward. I was also really interested to hear that the site has a lot more history than just that predates the industrialization of the site. So that was interesting to learn too. I guess, I think generally I don't have much heartburn about removing most of the structures on the site, like scale houses and truck scales. I think my big hesitation at this point is the domes. I do really think that they are a good representation and are just aesthetically, I know they're kind of ugly to look at, but I think aesthetically they're really interesting, and they could be cleaned up and used in a different way. So I would be really interested to see hear, I guess, what other commissioners say about that or have to think about the domes.
Thank you, Commissioner Johnson. I agree that I would be sad to see the domes go. I guess in reading the staff report, I felt like a more clear basis was established for the fact that it would be financially infeasible to keep most of what they're recommending for demolition.
I do agree that I think that both staff and the applicant did, give us more information about the domes and the cost and repairing them. But I still see the domes on all the renderings of the upper harbor terminal thing. Every rendering I see has the domes, so I just find it very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Johnson. Commissioner Bjornberg.
Yeah, I know that when this came through, the first time I had some questions about archaeology and the sort of mitigation plan, and I appreciate that the demolition is at least for a smaller amount of the structures. I guess I am interested in hearing sort of the thoughts from Commissioner Howard, especially after proposing or asking the question about having an HPC member involved in some of this like mitigation. It still feels a little bit unclear to me what the like actionable steps are from that plan. And especially hearing sort of some of the ideas or conversation around the conveyors and okay, yep, we're demolishing these, but then we're also maybe gonna use some of them for this interpretive piece. So it feels just a little, I don't know, I don't want to say early in the process, but like things are still being developed and that makes me a little bit uncomfortable. because I don't know what that's actually going to result in. So I wish that there were more clear actionable steps or a way for the HPC or SHPO or somebody to be involved to sort of like have a check on that. And then I would also say I still am just like not really seeing a lot of archaeology discussed here. And I think that I saw that there's, you know, this outline for a treatment plan, but that is like the basic structure of a report. It isn't necessarily saying what's going to be looked at, how they're going to be like looking for these things, especially understanding that they have done archaeology and found potentially significant resources there. So just, I guess, looking for additional clarity there. And then I do sort of think that one of the callers brought up a really interesting idea that we haven't talked about a lot here, and maybe it doesn't have a purpose here, but cultural significance and traditional cultural properties. That's not something that we have really talked about here, but along the river that can be a thing. And so I guess I'm just sort of interested in other ideas about conditions for this, or sort of where other people are at.
Thank you, Commissioner Bjornberg. Commissioner Howard.
Well, just to follow up on Commissioner Bjornberg's mention about wanting to know a little bit more about what I'm thinking for conditions. One would be that the HPC request to be a consulting party to the Section 106 undertaking. That would keep us abreast of what's happening with that, and we can provide comments on that could pull in some of this, the archaeology discussions, the traditional cultural property discussions, if that becomes part of that. Things like that. Another one would be that would be included in the review and comment process on the interpretive plan, similar to how we were for PV Plaza. And the idea being that we could provide guidance on potential salvage opportunities and reuse opportunities for various structures. And we could ensure that historic resources are actually part of that interpretation, because as it's written currently, I'm not seeing historic resources very clearly in the interpretive themes. Another thing that I was thinking about is related to the domes, and I think it would be appropriate for there to be a paper submitted to publication on the domes themselves. They could also be documented, but I think there's probably already extensive documentation, but we could request that a Minnesota historic property record be done of them and a paper submitted. Something appropriate would be like to the Journal for the Society of Industrial Archaeology. They do a peer-reviewed journal. That would be appropriate, or something a little more publicly accessible, of course, would be something like Minnesota History. And the other thing that I keep bouncing around in my head has to do with that larger district. And I'm concerned that after this site development is done, that this is going to be a big hole in that larger district. And I wonder if a reevaluation of the district would be necessary. That might come through the Section 106 process, and it might not be appropriate to tie to these. You know, we're just talking about demolition of a small subset of buildings at this point. But those are some of the things that I was thinking about.
Thank you, Commissioner Howard. Andrea?
Thank you. I wanted to make, as I was taking notes as you were talking, Commissioner Howard, I want to make a couple points known. Under the Section 106 process, the City of Minneapolis, and specifically the Heritage Preservation Commission, is always invited as part of every 106. They are a mandatory consulting party. More specifically, under the regulations, the local government is the mandatory consulting party, but it has become into practice that the HPC is invited as all to these as well. It has been our approach, and that generally staff comments on these for some of the larger projects based on some previous input from the commission. I will bring those before the commission as a discussion item. I think my opinion on your suggested potential condition is that staff will always be a part of the consulting party, and if there's a commissioner, generally it's the chair that can participate as well. I do want to make it known that I am very opposed to mixing the regulations for local and federal, and especially making a condition on a local application to be a part of 106. I have seen this happen in my experience as a compliance officer in another state, and it can get very complicated and legally messy. And that is why I really strongly prefer not to do that. However, as I said, and it's not to say that, hey, trust us, but generally we always get invited to be a consulting party as under 106 projects. There are multiple ones I am participating in, as well as my staff is participating on now. I wanted to just make that a quick comment. And then on second part, relative to other potential conditions such as an MHPR, the ordinance lays out, what can be included as mitigation, and I've included that on the last slide of my presentation, and I can always read it again. And I think that kind of falls in line with some of the possibilities for another condition to include for mitigation as part of a demolition, should you choose to approve it. I will leave it at that. Response.
Thank you, Andrea. In the HPC participating in 106, have you had that opportunity with the Corps before? Because I know not all federal agencies are as open to inviting HPCs, so and that's why I was talking about it that way. But if you feel comfortable that the Corps would invite you to be part of that consultation, then I would feel inclined to follow your lead. I too don't like to mix the two as much. I just know that not all federal agencies invite HPCs.
I do actually. I am participating with the Corps on a very large Section 106 project right now and a programmatic agreement. So I do feel confident that they would invite us per my request.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Howard. Thank you, Andrea. Commissioner Howard, I had similar concerns about documentation of the existing buildings and whether additional documentation could be part of the requested mitigation. But Andrea, it seems like I'm trying to find where in your report you had the what we were allowed to ask for mitigation. I guess I'm wondering about something like, could laser scanning of the site be requested? Something like that would keep the domes and everything in a virtual format that we could reference later.
If I could ask the tech team to go back to the slide 10 of my presentation where it discusses the text under the Code of Ordinances, that lays out what the ordinance says for what the commission can do for mitigation. May take a moment. While we're waiting for that to come up on the screen, if possible, I can read it here. Under 599-480C, it says the commission may require a mitigation plan as a condition of any approval for demolition of a historic resource. Such plan may include documentation of the property by measure drawings, photographic recording, historic research, or other means appropriate to the significance of the property. I'm at the very bottom here. Such plan may also include the salvage and preservation of specified building materials, architectural details, ornaments, fixtures, and other similar items for reuse or for use and restoration elsewhere.
Okay, thank you. I think that answers my question, because that seems like it kind of falls in line with what you were thinking, Commissioner Howard, in terms of maybe some measured drawings or something like that. Is that kind of the documentation you were having in mind?
Yeah, I was looking at documentation, but then more importantly, submitting something to a publication so that it's not just documentation and putting it into a shelf, but getting it out there, getting the word out there about the significance of those domes. So the documentation would be, whatever is needed to document them before they're demolished, but then telling people about it.
Yeah.
Why are they significant? That would be that would fall under the the historic research aspect.
I'm wondering if any other commissioners have any thoughts on this. It seems like there seems to be a general acceptance that this more limited demolition plan we're seeing today is probably necessary. And it seems like most of the concerns are around the mitigation. So I am, from what I'm hearing, I'm thinking we're leaning towards approval, but maybe with some additional conditions. But maybe there are commissioners who feel differently than that. Or maybe somebody wants to make a motion. I don't know. Commissioner Howard, do you actually have conditions written up in advance? Maybe we're not ready for that.
I'm drafting some, but it'd be great to hear from other commissioners.
Commissioner Bjornberg.
I'll speak while Commissioner Howard has some time to draft that up. Yeah, I mean, I don't really have a whole lot to add. I think that understanding that the HPC would have the ability to participate in the 106 process and hopefully be able to voice some of these concerns and sort of continue to play a role in the project as it develops makes me feel a little bit better about that. And I think that the ideas that we have heard from other commissioners about sort of documentation of the domes and publication of that documentation sound great. So I would say that once Commissioner Howard has a minute to write up and then articulate a motion, it's probably something that I will be on board with.
Thank you, Commissioner Bjornberg. I also wanted to sort of just address the comments that came up about the archaeology on the site and the history beyond the industrial history that we're mostly talking about. And I did want to, I guess, state on the record that as we see in our packet, there is an archaeological treatment plan for the site, and it includes an unanticipated discoveries section, which for members of the public who are probably super familiar with how this works, at least in my experience, that means that while this work is going on the site, while there's any excavation and things like that, if a item of archaeological interest is found, an archaeologist is brought in to do more careful looking. So if indigenous artifacts were found, it would be recorded, re-strategized, things would pause and take a look at it. It's not just like full steam ahead normally on these projects. And so I guess knowing that they have an unanticipated discoveries plan and archaeological treatment plan in general, I think will help capture anything that might come up during the construction that is beyond the buildings that we're seeing in this packet for demolition. So that ideally the whole history of the site is considered during the actual construction activities on the site. And then the interpretation, as it's been discussed so far, does with the different prongs of the city, the park board wants to focus on, at least to me, did seem like the indigenous heritage was being considered in that interpretation. Although, as we've said, we'd like to be involved in that interpretation plan so that we can make sure that it is more than, that it is all included. I would say that as a commission, our goal is to look at the whole history of a site, even if what the public is seeing us mostly talk about is domes. We're thinking about more than that. Are there any other commissioners who would like to speak? Especially our quieter commissioners who haven't spoken today. Want to give everyone a chance. Commissioner Van Der Eyck.
I was just going to add one comment on to what you just explained there, Chair Sundberg. I'm just happened to be going through this on a project of mine in my professional life. And I don't have any knowledge specifics on what type of due diligence has been done on this site, but I do have knowledge of general land in the city of Minneapolis, and I imagine that there's some level of contamination at this site, which will also impact the viability of any retention of archaeological resources. So just coming from my own experience on a project not too far from this particular site, we will have an archaeologist, and I imagine it's a result of Section 106 that this is happening in my project, so I wouldn't be shocked if something similar were to occur on the multiple different projects that are going to take place as a part of Upper Harbor Terminal's redevelopment. We're going to have an archaeologist on site during the duration of excavation who will be reviewing soil as it's removed for any cultural resources, documenting them, making note of them, and trying to decide whether or not they're viable for preservation. So I imagine that's what Section 106 is really for, is really to create a programmatic agreement that puts together that plan for the retention of cultural resources. Section 106 is meant to step in anytime governmental dollars are being used for capital improvement projects. And so, to the callers who called in with those concerns, I think that's a completely legitimate concern. And like Chair Sundberg said, it's definitely not outside of our purview or concern on the HPC. And I think we can all feel heartened by the fact that there are multiple eyeballs on these different levels of review, the HPC just being one of them. So that was just one note that I thought I'd provide to the callers who stepped in as I'm just going through this specifically on a project of mine right now.
Thank you, Commissioner Van Der Eyck. That has also been my experience on projects on the waterfront, is you pretty much have an archaeologist there all day long while excavation's going on. And I think you also raised an important point about the contamination. I'm assuming this whole site is a brownfield, just based off of the industrial uses. And so I guess that's my other concern with attempting to reuse any of the structures, is the level of contamination and cleaning of the existing buildings. I imagine that's part of the reason the costs are coming in so high for mothballing and reusing buildings. Just storage buildings for industrial uses, we weren't always that careful. And so I think that is an issue we run into on these sorts of properties. Commissioner Howard, I'm just checking in to see how your drafting is going. Okay.
All right, but I'm open to edits. So I don't usually do these complicated ones. So I would make a motion that the HPC adopt staff findings for the application by CPED and the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board, and approve the demolition of the historic resource application for the 19 historic resources within the potential Upper Harbor Historic District, Upper Harbor Terminal Historic District, I think it is, including the 3 monolithic concrete domes, subject to the following conditions, with condition 1 being as written in our agenda, and condition number 2 being an HPC commissioner will be included in the review and comment process for the developing the site's interpretive plan, providing guidance on potential salvage opportunities, and ensuring that historic resources are presented as part of the site's extensive history. And as number 3, the domes proposed for demolition will be documented through measured drawings, photography, and historical research, and presented in a paper submitted for publication in appropriate peer-reviewed journals, such as the Journal of the Society for Industrial Archaeology. And I have that written, so I can put it in the text box or in the chat box, unless we make some edits to it.
Thank you, Commissioner Howard. I would like to check with staff to make sure that that sounds clear to them.
It does, but I would ask Commissioner, thank you. Yes, I was looking for the written. Let me read over this real quick. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioners, I want to check to see if those conditions seem like they satisfy everybody's concerns. I think they satisfy my concerns. And while you think about that, if I could get a second on the motion, that would also be great.
80 seconds.
Thank you, Commissioner Stady. I'll continue the discussion here. Commissioner Nystrom, did you have some thoughts on that?
Well, not really. I was going to say that I agree with a lot of this, and I've been quiet because I don't have as much experience with the archaeological side of, riverfronts and all of that as some of you have. But I really appreciated this new report, as you all kind of reiterated, and I was going to second it. So, but Commissioner Stady beat me to it, so I will back away.
Thank you, Commissioner Nystrom. Any other discussion or any thoughts from staff now that you can see the motion?
Thank you. Yeah, those should work. I like that the 106 isn't included there. It's part of the interpretive plan, part of the AUAR. And then I believe that meets the letter for the ordinance in terms of, I'm sorry?
For the documentation.
For the documentation, yes, thank you.
Okay.
Oh, and excuse me, one more comment. Commissioner Howard, you had asked me earlier about the 2 standard conditions. No, they don't apply in this. They generally just apply to a certificate of appropriateness.
Great, thank you.
Okay. I guess I want to do a final call for any further discussion. I don't see any. Would the clerk please call a roll on the motion?
Commissioner Bjornberg.
Aye.
Commissioner Booty.
Aye.
Commissioner Howard.
Aye.
Commissioner Johnson.
Aye.
Commissioner Nystrom.
Aye.
Commissioner Stady.
Aye.
Commissioner Struthers.
Aye.
Commissioner Vandereyck.
Aye.
Chair Sundberg.
Aye.
That's 9 yeas and 0 nays.
Thank you. That motion passes. And I know we all look forward to seeing how this process goes forward. That concludes our public comment and public hearing items for tonight. Commissioners, are there any announcements? If not, staff announcements or new business to discuss.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do have several announcements. I will start off with recently the City Council took an action to extend the local public health emergency with no termination date. So at this point, it is indefinite. And the phased, how do I say this? When you do return to in-person, it will be a phased return to in-person meetings with the City Council going first. So this allows us to meet virtually for the foreseeable future, and stay tuned for any other further updates that would signal a return to in-person. So that is that. Another general reminder that next meeting is on a Wednesday, February 2nd. We'll start at 4:30. I know that's unusual, so just please mark your calendars and please let me know in advance if you will not be able to make it, so I can ensure we have quorum. Also, wanted to just give a quick update on commissioner recruiting because we will have 2 vacant positions, and I will get to the last item on that. Commissioner Stady has announced his resignation effective February 1st, 2022. I have sent out some recruitment messages. I unfortunately am unable to check the applications, so I'm not sure if we have received anything based on my efforts, but also to continue to encourage any potential citizens out there who may take an interest to sit on this board. I also wanted to bring up a topic that was brought up by Commissioner Howard with the adoption of the 2022 calendar. I don't think it was on there, but On previous calendars, we have a joint HBC CPC meeting every other month that's on the calendar, but I think the last time that this commission sat in on one of those meetings was probably over a year ago. Generally, we've used those meetings, which are open to the public to listen to, generally though not comment. We've used those for design reviews, to have a discussion between the City Planning Commission and the Heritage Preservation Commission. However, I noticed that they are not generally, they aren't frequent in terms of us having something go to them. And generally when we do have a design review, such as a new building, and by design review, I mean sort of a pre-design, not a certificate of appropriateness, they generally come before you in one of these meetings on Tuesday night as a discussion item. So I wanted to take the temperature of commissioners as to whether you would still be interested in keeping this. My understanding of the history of this is that commissioners years ago were interested in having more of a presence and opportunity for discussion with the Planning Commission. I will stop there. What are your thoughts on keeping these meetings every other month on a Thursday?
Commissioner Howard, did you want to respond to that?
Well, since I'm the one who pointed out that they weren't on our calendar, I thought I should start. And the reason why I've had mixed feelings about them since I've been on the commission. I think the conversations have been good when we've had them, when they were face to face and we were in a single room. I'm very concerned about some of the comments that were in last meeting's packet that came from the commission, or came from the planning commissioners, who seem to think that preservation is just an impediment to development. And so as much as some of these meetings can be challenging, I think it's important to keep the dialogue open between us and the Planning Commission so that they realize that it's not just an impediment to development and that preservation actually can be development, redevelopment. So I could go either way on these. Obviously, Thursday nights, I'm usually working until 6 anyway, so I can easily fill my time that way. But I do think it's important for us to have ways to converse with the planning commissioners that we don't currently have.
Thank you, Commissioner Howard. I guess I am in general in favor of them. I think it's been a little weird since we've gone virtual to do them because it's just then like more cooks in the kitchen on the virtual meeting trying to get it to work. But I know in person, at least, I think it's kind of put like a face to the name situation where the planning commissioners can actually talk to us and understand our perspectives, I think, a little bit more than just hearing about how we disagree with them on things. I guess I felt like it's been helpful. It seems like it's been helpful for the applicants, and I guess I can actually say that it is helpful for the applicants, having been on the applicant side, to hear from both commissions at once, because sometimes we do contradict in some things, and I think that that's less when we have a meeting where we all talk together and can hear each other's points, and then keep that in mind for when it comes before us. Like, oh yeah, we kind of have to compromise on this because it meets their goal in this way, maybe even if it doesn't meet our goal in that way. So I guess I'm in favor of them, but I do realize it adds another night of having to do something. They haven't been very frequent recently, though, and so I don't know are they becoming less popular with applicants, Andrea, or why haven't we seen? I think we've only done 1 or 2 since the pandemic started.
It's generally because that it has been, in terms of fitting them on agendas, it's been more convenient for timelines to fit them in on this meeting. And I think staff and maybe applicants has felt that they've gotten more productive comments when they are tacked on as a discussion item to an HBC meeting than something that generally happens kind of out of order for because they are, held so infrequently that, and I don't mean this in any negative way, but since kind of as we're doing these meetings, the minds are, your minds and staff's minds is on design guidelines, it's on HPC. So the comments that they're seeking generally go a little further at these meetings than they do at those. But the other reason is just timing wise, it's worked out easier to include it on a regular Tuesday night meeting.
Okay. Yeah, I guess if the applicants feel like they like the 2 separate meetings better, or they work better in the schedule, then then maybe that's just what works better. I guess I also feel like it has to do with the scale of the project. I'm thinking of that one large development project we saw it was like multiple skyscrapers, and we reviewed it together, and I thought that was really helpful because it was just so far outside of what we normally see. But for smaller projects, it maybe it doesn't really make sense.
One other comment is, another option is we just kind of leave it as it is. We keep it on the calendar. They are on the calendar. I don't think it didn't get included in the one that came to you for adoption, forgive me. So we can redo that, but we can leave it on there, and then we just have 2 options, and that's kind of how we used it based on timelines. Either we have the Thursday meeting that works better for staff and for the applicant's schedule to use that one, or, we use the Tuesday night. Keep in mind the quorum is much smaller that's needed for the Thursday night meeting. It's only a quorum of 3 HPC commissioners to attend, but I know, not that I get a vote, but my personal feeling is like the comments that the applicant is seeking from the larger commission really, it holds water better when you have more of you up here that are able to give them comments than the 3 that are generally arrive for quorum at a joint meeting. But I see both sides.
Thank you, Andrea. I guess I'm kind of neutral on it. I don't know if other commissioners have any thoughts on it. Do we need to vote on something, Andrea? Or do we just maintain the status quo otherwise?
We can maintain the status quo. I think I just wanted to get your idea for it. It's not an action item that you need to formally vote. I just wanted to bring it up based on Commissioner Howard's question and the oversight on behalf of us that we missed that out going in the calendar. So I think it's fine. We can leave it as status quo, and as they come up, and we can always keep that door open to have those conversations with the Planning Commission and move forward from there.
Andrea, could you send a revised calendar with those dates marked?
Yeah, I'll look into it. I'll have to check with the clerks to see if we have to readopt it. So.
Rachel said that she can do it. Thank you, Rachel. And if we need to readopt it, we can do that at another meeting.
Sounds good. The only last announcement that I have, if nobody else does, so I'll pause before we go to the very last announcement, is Chair Sundberg, I'm not trying to take your position, but
that's okay. Commissioners, were there any other announcements before Andrea does her last end of meeting announcement here? I don't see any, Andrea. I think you're good to go.
So I will, as I mentioned a little earlier, Commissioner Stady, who has been on this commission since February of 2013, is resigning in February of 2022. So as tradition, we read a resolution that we have put together, and the chair, myself, and then the Development Services Director has signed. I will have Rachel Blanford, our clerk, read it, but I just wanted to give a quick preamble to say thank you to Commissioner Stady for all your years of service, for all of your comments on all of the designation studies, design guidelines, community engagement groups you've volunteered to be a participant in. We appreciate that. Thank you for making it to all of these meetings, and I will leave it at that. Rachel, you can read the resolution.
Thank you. So, to resolution of appreciation for Ian Stady for his dedicated service to the Minneapolis Heritage Preservation Commission. Whereas the Minneapolis Heritage Preservation Commission is the quasi-judicial citizen review panel that provides direction and regulation on preservation business within the city of Minneapolis. And whereas Ian has served on the City of Minneapolis Heritage Preservation Commission since February of 2013 and has participated in over 180 public hearings and in countless deliberations and actions of the commission. And whereas Ian has helped to shape the preservation of Minneapolis through decisions on properties designated as landmarks, historic districts, and nominations to the National Register of Historic Places, including the Tilson-built Homes Historic District, Northrop Mall Historic District, the Church of Incarnation Historic District, the Lyndhurst Residential Historic District, Joyce Memorial Methodist Church, Sound 80 Studios, the Minneapolis Armory, and Zinn's Master Baking Company building. And whereas Ian has demonstrated tremendous dedication and generosity in sharing both his time and knowledge, and whereas Ian has expressed his commitment to engaging underrepresented communities, and whereas the Minneapolis Heritage Preservation Commission wishes to formally recognize Ian's dedicated service to the Minneapolis Heritage Preservation Commission and City. Now, therefore, be it resolved by the Minneapolis Heritage Preservation Commission and the staff to the Minneapolis Heritage Preservation Commission of the City of Minneapolis that we thank Ian Stady for his faithful and constructive service in extending the progress of the city and in promoting the welfare of its people. That we extend him our best wishes for good health and happiness in all of life's endeavors, trusting that the friendships and understanding built in our mutual undertakings will be with us always. Approved by the Minneapolis Heritage Preservation Commission on this 18th day of January 2022.
Thank you. Thank you, Rachel, and thank you, Ian. I know we'll all miss having you here on the commission. Sorry we can't take you out for drinks like I know was the pre-pandemic tradition for the HPC when commissioners left their post. Maybe someday after the pandemic, we'll all get together for drinks. So with that, we have completed all items on the agenda for this meeting. I will ask members and staff if there are any other matters to come before this meeting.
No.
Okay. Oh, Commissioner Stady, would you like to give a farewell?
Yes, I just wanted to give just a thank you for the send off, and it's I just think like all those properties that you just named off, it's just amazing how many parts of the city we get to touch when in our work, and I'm very appreciative of working with you all. I have a lot of gratitude for this work, and if you're ever in Eden Prairie, I manage the library out there now, so that's partially why it's a little harder to get to meetings, because that's my it's my duty to be there during meeting time. But it's a great example of adaptive reuse of a grocery store if you ever want to check it out. And I just wanted to say also to encourage you to think about task force, using task forces for revision of guidelines sometimes when we run into things. Maybe a few times we notice something or you notice something, and maybe there's some tweaks that could be done. So with that, I thanks so much for the send off, and I wish you the best in 2022.
Thank you, Ian. There being no other business this meeting, if not and without objection, I will declare this meeting adjourned. The next regular meeting of the HPC is February 2nd, 2022. Thank you, everyone.